Oh, I didn't see you there. How about we take a second and talk about a little story I like to call Jazz.
Here's the condensed version of Jazz. A married dude shoots his 18-year-old girlfriend, and she dies. His wife is understandably bummed out. Everyone sits around thinking about history and listening to jazz for a few months. Another 18-year-old shows up, and the married couple dances and is happy again. And scene. But that's like giving you 30 seconds of Harry Potter. Let's go into the details. Okay, so basically, the whole book is narrated by an unnamed narrator that floats about the book and gives us insight on everyone's conscience. Anyway, he starts off the book by introducing us to this couple, Joe and Violet, whose marriage has fallen into ruins because he has an affair with an 18-year-old girl, and then he kills. Not exactly the recipe for a healthy marriage. Violet does what any sane woman would do and tries to stab the face of the dead girl who's named Dorcas at her funeral. Okay, maybe not sane. Now, their house really sucks. They do nothing but mope all day and stare at a picture of Dorcas, which Violet hung in their house. Violet tries to get Joe's attention back, so she gets herself a new boyfriend, but when that doesn't impress him, she tries to imitate his dead girlfriend. In any way possible. Creepy, I know. Despite her desperate attempt, Joe acts like a scumbag and pays her no attention. But we get some information on their relationship before Dorcas. As it turns out, Violet was kinda cuckoo. She was trying to steal babies and carrying baby dolls with her. Violet and Joe met under a tree in Virginia on a cotton field where they worked. They fell in love and eventually moved to New York during the Great Migration. Despite their sparks-flying romantic marriage, Violet goes crazy because she wants to have kids but can't get any, and Joe gets a case of the old wandering eye. Eventually he meets Dorcas, who he has an affair with in a room he constantly rents out from his neighbor. We later meet Alice, Dorcas' aunt, who is super strict and reserved. Her and Violet foster a friendly relationship, odd considering Violet tried to stab her niece in the face on her funeral, but as it turns out, Alice thinks Dorcas is a tramp who had it coming. When Alice and Violet are having a heart-to-heart, we find out what we later meet Alice, Dorcas' aunt, who is super strict and reserved. Her and Violet foster a friendly relationship, odd considering Violet tried to stab her niece's face at her funeral, but as it turns out, Alice thinks Dorcas is a tramp who had it coming. When Alice and Violet are having a heart-to-heart, we find out that Violet lived with her grandmother, Truebell, because her mother committed suicide, and that Joe never knew his biological family but was raised by nice people. The narrator then ends the book by telling us about Joe and Violet's restored relationship. They go out and drink milkshakes together, and cuddle in bed, talking to each other. And basically, all is good in the world because they have each other and were able to put everything and anything horrible behind them. The end.
Okay, now on to literary element number 1. Okay, so Netta gave you the rundown, but what does any of it mean? Kinda just sounds like a cheesy soap opera, right? Well, there actually is a lot of thematic deepness to Morrison's work. Yes, indeed, Morrison seems to convey that violence does actually create more violence. Let's just take a look at the very basic plot, for example. Out of mysterious reasons, Joe decides to kill his mistress, Dorcas. Then, angered by Joe's affair and his violent act, Violet, Joe's wife, decides to cut off Dorcas's face to exact revenge. Ultimately, through her use of tone, however, Morrison is able to create an eerie atmosphere in the novel that shows how violence results in more violence. Toward the beginning of the novel, Morrison uses a clinical and almost indifferent tone. For instance, through the voice of Alice, one of Violet's friends, Morrison recalls an event in St. Louis, Missouri, where a man, quote, was pulled off a streetcar and stomped to death, and Alice's sister had just got the news and gone back home to try and forget the color of her entrails when her house was torched and she was burned crispy in flames, end quote, page 58. In describing this very extreme violence in such a clinical and nonchalant way, Morrison depicts a sort of normalization of violence that characterized the suppression of the civil rights movements in the 1960s. She continues her use of a similar tone to later reveal how witnessing such violence had perpetuated a violent culture. Retelling the events that open the novel, Morrison narrates how, when Violet decided to mutilate the body of her husband's mistress, Dorcas, she says, "It bounced off," quote, making a little dent under her earlobe, like a fold in the skin that was hardly a disfigurement at all. She could have left it at that, the fold under her earlobe, but that Violet, unsatisfied, fought with the hard-handed usher boys, and it was time enough for them, almost. End quote, page 128. Once again, Morrison describes the horrific events in a very systematic and ordinary way, thereby illustrating how this sort of violence had been internalized. By previously describing events in different characters' upbringings and experiences, Morrison hints that this acceptance is something that was learned over years. Now, enough about tone. Let's go over to Joe, who will talk about how Felice's character serves as a symbol to point to our same theme.
Now let's dive a little bit deeper into the novel. Morrison uses violence as the basis for many of the thematic, imagerial, and characterial foundations in jazz. Even though she was narrating about the culture and ambiance of a fun, lively community get-together, Morrison's description of a simple party represents her attempt at infusing the past history of slavery and racial violence into the characters, imagery, and themes of her novel. The same struggle that were apparent during slavery and racial aggressions towards African Americans of the time were plugged into her story through allusion and thematic similarities. Not to mention, when describing the ambiance of the protagonist's favorite city, Morrison describes it with violent, blunt diction, signifying yet again her subtle effort to connect the past struggles of her race to her novel. Even since the first page of Jazz, Morrison introduced the complicated relationship between Violet, her husband, and her husband's murdered 18-year-old mistress, another testament to her purposeful connection of the novel's plot to violence.
While Dorcas became the reason for violence and conflict in Joe and Violet's lives, her best friend, Felice, became the opposite. In visiting the house to help console Joe and Dorcas' death, she ends up bringing the couple together. Quick fun fact for you guys and gals. Felice's name actually means happy, and this is important as her name is representative of the happiness she brings to Joe and Violet. Alright, back on track. She not only constantly had Violet and Joe talking together, but she even had them dancing together, for the first time in forever. While simple dance may seem like something small to many, this dance not only represents the bond that Felice is creating in Joe and Violet's relationship, but the rebirth of the feelings they once had for one another when they first danced their way up to the city. Felice really represents the creation of Joe and Violet's new life together, and can even be thought of as the long-lost child in a sense. The rebirth effect she had on their relationship can be seen as representing the almost birth of their new child. Going on with the rebirth idea, we can see she also gives Joe new hope in setting out to find a new job, symbolizing a new start for the family. Through Felice's nonviolent approach to Joe and Violet's relationship, we can see that she creates the reverse effect at Dorcas' destructive behavior out on the couple. While Dorcas furthers the bonds between Violet and Joe through a chaotic affair, Felice is able to bring the two together through her nonviolent actions.
So, in conclusion, Toni Morrison's book shows us how violence only leads to more violence. We saw this especially through her tone of writing. Especially in the beginning of the novel, it was indifferent and nonchalant, an interesting choice given the dramatic events that occurred in the first few pages. To counter all the crazy violence and drama, Morrison introduces the character Felice. Felice basically represents happiness in jazz, and therefore is able to bring Joe and Violet together, while most other characters did exactly the opposite. Lastly, Morrison's use of imagery and her symbolic references to African American history tie together the theme of violence as a catalyst to more violence. So basically, the message that Toni Morrison is trying to tell us throughout her novel Jazz is that with an eye for an eye, everyone ends up blind in the end. Thank you.